Hello and welcome. You are watching India Interest here on News 9 Live. I'm Krishnakumar. It is the 78th Independence Day of India. Wishing all Indians in India and across the world very warm wishes. But on the occasion of the 78th Independence Day, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered his Independence Day address, his 11th Independence Day address, in which he put the spotlight on the reforms undertaken by his government and how they are paving the way for Viksit Bharat 2047. But what are the challenges ahead? Let's find out. India is celebrating its 78th Independence Day, and PM Modi, in his speech at the Red Fort, emphasized that Viksit Bharat 2047 is more than just a slogan. The goal of Viksit Bharat embodies a profound commitment to India's future. During his address, PM Modi talked about how various reforms undertaken by his government over the last decade or so have catapulted India closer to the Viksit Bharat goal. He highlighted how banking-related reforms have made it easy for different sections of society, be it students, youth, farmers, entrepreneurs, or blue-collar workers, to get loans. Listen in.
हमने बैंकिंग सेक्टर को मजबूत बनाने के लिए अनेक विध रिफॉर्म्स किए और आज उसका कारण हमारी बैंक विश्व में जो इन्हीं गुनी मजबूत बैंक हैं उसमें भारतीय बैंकों ने अपना स्थान बनाया है। और जब बैंक मजबूत होती है ना, तब फॉर्मल इकोनॉमी की ताकत भी बढ़ती है। जब बैंक की व्यवस्था बन जाती है, जब सामान्य खास करके मध्यम वर्ग के परिवार की जो रिक्वायरमेंट होती है उसको पूरा करने की सबसे बड़ी ताकत बैंकिंग सेक्टर में होती है। अगर उसको होम लोन चाहिए, उसको व्हीकल का लोन चाहिए, मेरे किसान को ट्रैक्टर के लिए लोन चाहिए, मेरे नौजवानों को स्टार्टअप के लिए लोन चाहिए, मेरे नौजवानों को कभी पढ़ने के लिए एजुकेशन के लिए लोन चाहिए, किसी को विदेश जाने के लिए लोन चाहिए, ये सारी बातें उसे संभव होती है।
And to help us put into perspective the Prime Minister's speech on economic reforms in the country, joining us now are Mr. Srinath, Sridharan, policy researcher and corporate advisor, and Mr. Llyod Mathias, angel investor. Thank you both of you gentlemen for taking time to be with us here on In Your Interest on Independence Day. Srinath, let me begin with you. Big focus on the banking sector reforms. Yes, they've meant that the NPAs or non-performing assets or bad loans in this country have come down, but they've also made it difficult for MSMEs to get access to loans or credit. Talk to us, how much are we reaping the benefits of banking reforms, and how much more is there to go?
Sure, I think it will be too premature to call it as banking reform, Krishna. While much of effort has gone to cleaning up the banking balance sheets in the last few years, I think the reality is banking reforms have not really truly taken off yet, or probably even intended. We have been speaking about consolidating private sector banks to have at least one or two banks the size of, which has a size of global scale. Even SBI, it doesn't have that size, and SBI is one of the largest banks in the country. So I think my wish list for Modi government 3.0 is that, saying that banking reforms, bring in banking reforms, because the depth of our financial markets have to go far deeper than what it is today. Yes, if you look at the financial market outside of banking, in the asset management space, that's mutual fund, the number of retail investors who have started investing and believing in financial assets rather than the traditional thinking of gold and real estate has expanded. It's a great sign. But coming back to your point, Krishna, about MSME, there's a structural inherent issue that we have with our banking style. Traditionally, the Indian banking system, the largest exposure it takes is to the government business and the large enterprises, which is the business, the corporate sector. Whereas if you compare with the other developed markets and the West, let's say UK and US and even Singapore, the corporates borrow from the bond markets and not from the banks. Right. If the corporates and even the government themselves were to borrow from the global bond markets or the domestic markets, it will allow the banks to actually focus on retail individuals like you and me, and SME and MSME. And that's a structural design that banks have a challenge today, which means that every single bank in India is almost, while it speaks about retail, its actual breadwinner and earnings come from government business as well as corporate business. And I think unless we make that shift and nudge our banks to say, look at retail, things won't change. The classic example, the priority lending done for the priority sector PSL limits. It is regulatorily specified. If that limit were not mentioned, my professional belief is most of our banks would not even lend to that sector.
Okay. Lloyd, banking reforms is one thing. The Prime Minister also spoke about, it being a golden era and employment opportunities abound, but some of the facts on the ground seem to be contradicting that. Be it the, look at what happened with the IT sector and the layoffs in the IT sector, or the fact that, the number of unicorns we are churning out this year far lower than what we could do a couple of years ago. You've seen with the Reliance, one of the biggest corporate group in the country, slashing down its overall workforce number. There is definitely some incongruence.
True, Krishna. But I think Independence Day is a moment when, the nation takes stock in a sense. And it's quite natural for the Prime Minister when he addresses the nation from the ramparts of the Red Fort to highlight some of the positive things. And clearly, this government and India in the last decade or so has clearly achieved a few significant wins. There's no denying that. Having said which, I think there are clearly a lot of other issues that will not have made it to the Prime Minister's address that are a big concern. I think the biggest concern that we have is there is still the issue of poverty and income inequality. I think that's an issue that has raised its heads at various forums, and possibly is also showing up in a lot of social distress and, the big agitations and eruptions that we see ever so often. I think that has a strong economic underlying element to it. The second, and associated with that to my mind, is unemployment, right? We haven't really got down to tackling employment in the real, unemployment in the real sense. And also a layer beneath that I would call is underemployment. The fact that India is still churning out meaninglessly thousands and millions of graduates who've got no real workplace to go to, right? So whether that emphasis on just turning out plain graduates gets into slightly better skilling, because there are a whole range of areas where there is a shortage of people, but somehow that our education system seems to be mismatched to that count. Two other highlights I want to address. I think one is the whole issue of agriculture distress that hasn't gone away. I know the government pushed hard for agricultural reforms. I know there was a pushback. I know the nature of the beast is such that there will always be opposition by the big farmers and the middlemen. But I still think that is one of the core areas that will be needed before the Indian economy fires. The fact that almost 60% of our population is dependent on agriculture. Agricultural land holdings are getting smaller and smaller. The small farmer really doesn't have much of a way to keep this living going, and therefore you have another generation moving to bigger cities in search of jobs. I think that's adding a problem. We still haven't got down, whether it's land reforms that need to be done or agricultural reforms at a grassroots level. I think that's a big problem. And the last point that I want to highlight clearly is infrastructure. I know this government takes the high road in terms of celebrating infrastructure, and a lot of it has been fantastic, I would certainly admit. But the fact that the developments recently have also proved that infrastructure is as much about quantity and the number of roads going up as much about quality. And if you look at some of the recent developments, bridge collapses, airports, I think that really speaks a lot for our ability, right? It's important to boost infrastructure, but I think having a quality mindset to ensure, I think these are issues that really never got covered. And these are kind of clear, hard impediments to a Viksit Bharat, right? I think everyone is clear that India is moving forward, got reason to celebrate. We are the fastest growing large economy, but is it good enough? Is that good enough for Viksit Bharat? And I think we still have a lot of significant hurdles which need to be cleared in the days ahead.
Okay, many more hurdles. But the Prime Minister also, as part of his speech, took a pot shot at how his reforms are meant to strengthen the country and not exactly, to appease the experts and the intellectuals writing editorials. Let's listen to that excerpt.
रिफॉर्म के प्रति हमारी जो प्रतिबद्धता है वो पिंक पेपर के एडिटोरियल के लिए सीमित नहीं है। हमारे रिफॉर्म्स की ये प्रतिबद्धता है वो 4 दिन की वाहवाही के लिए नहीं है। हमारी रिफॉर्म्स की प्रक्रिया किसी मजबूरी में नहीं है, देश को मजबूती देने के इरादे से है।
Srinath, that's a pretty direct attack on pink paper editorials that, the Modi government's reforms are meant to create change on the ground and not necessarily appease, those in glass door cabins.
See, Krishna, without empirical evidence, there was an empirical evidence until last year. One of the media houses had done a survey on the actual op-eds written by people who are in power or close to power, and not differently, the mainstream media op-eds seem to be actually controlled. The narrative seems to be controlled by the elites and the influentials. So it's only in the third term of Modi government you would see some of the, let's say, critique, I'm not even saying criticism, critique op-eds actually starting to appear. Otherwise, the last 10 years, you've had only people close to policy making actually write. Which country would you find the ministers and bureaucrats writing op-eds instead of researchers writing op-eds? So that's a point that I want to make. But I think there is a message in what the PM says very positively. While there has been a lot of effort done in the national level, what about the state capacity building that we do? And I think that I'm hopeful that the Finance Commission, the 16th Finance Commission, pragmatically brings out inherent strengths of every state. Otherwise, more than 8% of our states are actually piggy banking. The second or the third largest revenue stream for them is actually alcohol tax. So some of those have to change. If India wants to be a leader in manufacturing, at least 3 or 4 states have to pick the bulk of that heavy lifting. So the reality is we are not hearing any of those conversations. But again, that is going to be a test of how politically can the center and the states come together. And that I think that we are going to see being challenged in the Finance Commission. But two, I think also the other one, if you the slides that you're showing or the graphs that you're showing, Krishna, on screen, also have an indicator, right? As much as our GDP grows per capita and we try to catch up, the couple of other countries also will keep growing. So we also have a reality check that we have to grow much, much faster, inclusive, just to ensure that we are, let's say, the third largest or the fifth largest economy, and that's a challenge that we have. And just to add what Llyod said, I think I would probably kind of compromisely say, I think we need Ladla reforms. I'm creating a mnemonic called LADLA, Ladla reform, to say that we need land, we need administrative reforms. We have not had administrative reforms of who is accountable in bureaucracy or judiciary for decades now. So administrative reform. We need far more digital reforms to ensure that there's more transparency, data governance, because in the 21st century, almost everything is going to be around data, ML, AI, all that reforms. Labor reforms, and lastly, the agricultural reforms. I think this Ladla reform is what will give us more movement towards those GDP catch-up. And again, this will mean a lot of work with the states. It can't be done only at the center.
Okay. Llyod, I'll come to you on the Prime Minister's spot shot at pink paper editorials. But quickly, before that, as part of his speech, the Prime Minister outlined how India is already on the path towards growth. And amongst other things, he spoke about the rise in exports and increasing trust of global institutions in India. Let's listen to that.
ग्लोबल ग्रोथ में भारत का योगदान बड़ा है। भारत का एक्सपोर्ट लगातार बढ़ रहा है। विदेशी मुद्रा भंडार लगातार बढ़ा हुआ है, पहले से 2 गुना पहुंचा है। ग्लोबल संस्थानों का भारत के प्रति भरोसा बढ़ा है।
Llyod, if global institutions are trusting India more, and then the Prime Minister's call to trust pink paper editorial less comes from that.
I think we'll have to factor in some of these aspects. I do agree that it's normal for a politician to take a shot at pink paper edits, and I think to some extent there is some validity there. I won't go into the specifics behind that. But what I would certainly say is that true, and I fully conceive the fact that as a nation we have a lot to celebrate. I think some of the things that we have done are truly the envy of the rest of the world. I think our digital public infrastructure, if you look at just something as simple as UPI, I think that's something that we can certainly feel proud about. But while on a momentous day like Independence Day, we celebrate these victories, I think we can't look away at some of the serious issues on the ground, right? I think clearly our big concerns really have to be about MSMEs, right? While the Prime Minister talked about banking being, the NPAs coming down and our banks being more robust, do we have enough of a credit line to the MSME sector? That is where there's a large chunk, a third of our population effectively is involved in some way in MSMEs. Now, until that begins to become a labor generator, until MSMEs end up doing some form of exports, I think we will continue to be a laggard. That's one area. The other point that's not going away in a hurry, despite all that has been said, is that the ease of doing business, right? Red tapeism, bureaucracy is still very rampant, right? If you just look at global investors, the moment they come into India, they face a whole series of hurdles between intent and actual action on the ground. I think that's an issue. The other point that understandably wasn't really covered is what about environmental concerns? We are seeing it in all our cities. A little monsoon, roads going disarray, pollution at various, India ranks among the highest in most of our cities. I think environmental concerns are real. And it is incumbent upon the administration to actually address issues of that sort. Then, of course, things like safety of women, right? We're seeing the whole, the fracas around the Calcutta rape victim. I think there are a lot of social issues that also need tackled. While I understand that the Independence Day speech is not some time to review all these aspects, right. I think until some of these impediments get addressed, our economy and Viksit Bharat will still remain a bit of a dream.
Okay. Now, briefly, as part of his speech, PM Modi also spoke about something called as Industry 4.0. He said that the government will take all required steps to skill people, and he spoke more about that Skill India program and called it a success story. Listen in.
जिस प्रकार से आज विश्व का बदलाव नजर आ रहा है और तब जाकर के स्किल का महत्व बहुत बढ़ गया है और हम स्किल को और नई एक ताकत देना चाहते हैं। हम इंडस्ट्री 4.0 को ध्यान में रख करके हम स्किल डेवलपमेंट चाहते हैं। हम जीवन के हर क्षेत्र में, हम एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर में भी कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग करके देने के लिए स्किल डेवलपमेंट चाहते हैं।
Srinath, skill development in everywhere from industry to agriculture, would you call it a success story?
So far, a good attempt, but I wouldn't call it a success story yet. But again, the nature of the beast about skilling and reskilling is that it's dynamically changing almost every single year. By the time you finish skilling, and India has a challenge of population, plenty of population, 80 crore Indians in the productive age of 15 to 65. How do you keep unskilling and reskilling people? The very fact that 3 of us here will also need to be reskilled almost every year or every 2 years just to keep pace in our own industries. So with that challenge, I think the skilling corporation or the skilling design itself has to evolve. But I think one of the structural changes the government has a good intent has kickstarted is the NEP, of where it has built skilling along with education. But the challenge there is really execution, right? How much of the states have adopted NEP and have rolled it out? So unless that is rolled out fully, a good intent and a great policy of NEP will not actually offer any fruit. And I think that's a challenge of what I spoke earlier. Federal to state collaboration, I think, is going to be very, very key for any of these. These are all very grassroots level initiatives. It cannot be done only with parliamentary authority or, let's say, rolling out an idea. At the grassroots level, how do we implement it? Let's not forget that the third layer of governance, not the federal, not the state, but the urban or the municipal governance reforms or a devolution of authority to them is also something that is awaited and watched for this time, saying that can we build capacities of that?
Okay. Srinath there getting us that perspective on the possibilities of Viksit Bharat 2047 and Skill India's role in it. I'm afraid we've completely run out of time with that. Srinath, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. And Llyod as well, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on this edition of Indian Interest on India's 78th Independence Day. With that, it's a wrap here from my side. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishnakumar signing off.